In the mountains of northern California, true giants are said to lurk, sifting through the many waterways of the region. If hiking alone and you choose to take a break near a stream at night, you may hear a groggy croak. When going to investigate, you may come face to face with a slimy menace at the end of your flashlight. A salamander, the size of a crocodile, potentially larger than any salamander in the world. Welcome to Cryptid Corner, a series all things cryptids, and today we are going to look into the Trinity Alps Giant Salamander. The Trinity Alps are a mountain range in northern California in Trinity and Siskiyou counties. The range is part of the Klamath Mountain system, with the Californian coastal ranges to the west and the Cascade Range to the east. The Trinity Alps is best known for its scenic views and its distinct alpine wilderness. The Trinity Alps wilderness possesses the second highest number of conifer species in the world, mainly due to its geological location, being nestled between the Mediterranean climate of the south and the rainy weather of the American northwestern coast. And along with its many lakes, rivers, and streams, Trinity Alps is home to a lively wilderness. And one species of animal that is an excellent indicator of healthy ecosystems are salamanders. And Trinity Alps is rife with salamanders, such as the rough-skinned newt, they are salamanders, long-toed salamanders, northwestern salamanders, Ensatina, and the coastal giant salamander. But according to local legend, there are said to be colossal salamanders living in the lakes of Trinity Alps that put all others to shame. The Trinity Alps giant salamanders are said to call the waters of the Trinity Alps wilderness home, living in streams similar to Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders, along with lakes and rivers in the region, and dwarfing all known native species. These salamanders are reported as dark brown or black, sometimes with spots with broad heads and wide eyes, and are also reported to either croak or growl. The accounts kind of vary. Like many large salamander species, the size of these salamanders varies, with most reports claiming them to be around 2 to 3 feet long, with some standout reports claiming sizes as massive as 9 feet long. Even the smaller sighted salamanders beat out the largest confirmed salamanders species in the area, that being the coastal giant salamander, which reaches sizes of about 13 to 14 inches in length, but the larger salamander sightings put all salamanders to shame. For perspective, the current contenders for the largest salamanders are the critically endangered Chinese giant salamander and the South China giant salamander, with both of them reaching lengths of up to 6 feet and weighing about 110 pounds. And the largest salamander of all time so far goes to the extinct Matthews giant salamander, which was endemic to the American West during the Miocene and is estimated to have reached a maximum of 7 feet and 7 inches in length. If the reports of the Trinity Alps salamanders at their maximum sizes are to be believed, they would easily be the largest salamanders of all time, at least what we know of. And speaking about those reports, let's get into a few. The Hoopa and Wentu native peoples who have called Northern California home for thousands of years all have many stories of large beings that have dwelled in the streams of the Trinity Alps wilderness, which could serve as myths or symbolism, but are still noteworthy as overlooking native reports is a great way to delay advancements. From the late 1800s into the early 1900s, trappers, prospectors, and hunters would occasionally report unusually large salamanders in the area, but their reports tended to be vague and were written off, until one of the earliest documented sightings would come in the 1920s with Frank L. Griffith, when he would spot 5 salamanders at the bottom of a lake, ranging from 5 to 9 feet in length. He would attempt to catch one with his fishing rod, and he would even hook one as well, but the salamander was far too strong, and he'd have to let go of the rod and would be ultimately mauled by the salamander. Griffith's story would catch the attention of biologist Thomas L. Rogers, who would make 4 attempts to find the giant salamanders, but with each attempt, he would end it in failure. Roger believed that the salamanders could have either been massive Pacific giant salamanders or relatives of the Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders. In 1939, a giant salamander fitting the description of the Trinity Alps Giant Salamander would be caught in the Sacramento River and was even kept alive in the fisherman's bathtub and was in good health. The salamander was about 25 to 30 inches in length and would be observed by George C. Myers for nearly 30 minutes, who himself had experience in handling Japanese giant salamanders and was briefly familiar with the Chinese species through photos. And he believed it to be one of those salamanders, but could not match it with either of the species due to differences in its coloration, entertaining the idea that it could even be a new species related to them, or probably the hellbender, the largest salamander in North America, which is typically around the size and description of the specimen captured. Myers would publish his findings in 1951, and after this sighting, there would be a big ramp up in activity around these salamanders. In the mid-50s, an animal handler named Vern Hardin would report seeing a giant salamanders in a remote lake in Trinity Alps, and even reportedly caught one, and he'd end up releasing it because there was a snowstorm coming or something, and he apparently caught an 8-foot salamander, so that dude was probably either yoked as hell, or the salamander gave him it, or he's making it up. Claims like that of Hardin would catch the attention of Jesuit scholar, explorer, and naturalist Father Hubbard, who would set out on several expeditions with his brother, Captain John D. Hubbard, in the late 50s, with Hubbard even claiming to have established the existence of the salamanders in 1960, although no record of their expeditions exists, and it seems either made up or is lost media. Also in 1960, big year for these salamanders, mind you, several expeditions would be carried out in search of the giant salamanders, including Robert C. Stebbins of the University of California, Berkeley, Nathan Cohen of Modesto Junior College, Thomas Rogers, known for the 4 prior expeditions with the backing of Chico State College, and another independent search from Bigfoot hunter Tom Slick's Pacific Northwest Expedition Team, who were told to keep an eye out for the giant salamander while looking for Bigfoot. And a side note, these guys really did not want to look for the salamander, and seemingly all they wanted to do was look for Bigfoot. Screw the big lizard crocodile, we're looking for Bigfoot here. This is some serious business. The expeditions all came back with nada, zilch, with Rogers' team being accompanied by 10 goofsters who would sometimes mistake logs in the water for salamanders, so he probably had a really aggravating time. Oh, look, there it is. It's a log. Oh my god. In the 60s, forest rangers would report spotting a large salamander in Trinity Alps, but no evidence. And the last expedition would be held kind of recently in 1997, led by Japanese-American writer Kyle Mizukami, when he would come back empty-handed, with any giant salamander slipping away from prying eyes. Now that we got all of our reports settled up, how do we explain this? Well, in Cryptid Corner fashion, we're going to start with the wackiest theory, that being that these salamanders could have been distant relatives of Matthew's giant salamander, if not a surviving group of them. I typically am on board with giving plausibility to a recently extinct species living on in isolation, but in the case of the Matthews giant salamander, these things were estimated to have gone extinct millions of years ago, with Ice Age climate of North America being just a completely different world for these salamanders to exist in. On top of that, next to nothing is known about these salamanders, as information on them is exceptionally sparse. So them surviving in a park in California, one of the most populated states in the Union, undetected, seems pretty unlikely, but I will say not impossible. Many theories are proposed as to what the salamanders could have been by the many people searching for them, with Rogers and Myers both thinking that these could be relatives of the Asian giant salamanders or just straight up either of the species living on in America. Matthew's giant salamander was a distant ancestor of the current Asian salamanders, so this could be an extension of the prior theory, but I want to focus on these salamanders being one or the other, the Japanese or the Chinese or the South China. A plausible explanation for them being either a Japanese or Chinese giant salamander could be someone who kept them as an exotic pet and released them into the wild once they got way too big to handle. The duration of the sightings could make sense as well, as salamanders can live as old as 60 years old, with some undocumented claims of Chinese giant salamanders living for 200 years. And the lakes and rivers of Trinity Alps are heaven for giant salamanders, with plenty of food and room to wiggle around in. Perhaps, in the 60s, the last of these salamanders died off, either of old age or from getting picked off by a predatory animal like a bear or something. One of the most commonly accepted theories is that these salamanders are a population of hellbenders, as stated prior. Hellbenders are mainly found in the American Northeast and northern corners of the Mississippi, but perhaps isolated populations exist in parts of the northwestern United States, including Trinity Alps and Sacramento River. Regarding the Sacramento River salamander, I in particular believe this was a hellbender, given that size and the description nearly perfectly matched it. Myers did entertain the idea of the salamander being a new species, or perhaps one of the Asian salamanders, but it wasn't anything concrete. Cryptozoologists like to make that like set in stone that, oh, he hard, thought of that, but it was more of him just proposing the idea and playing with it. But he also gave weight to the hellbender hypothesis. Perhaps the salamanders seen in Trinity Alps as well were hellbenders, either a population that avoided humans or pet salamanders that were dumped in the lake when they got too big to take care of. Perhaps these salamanders reached massive sizes in the lakes, leading to them being exaggerated by people seeing them. After all, when people do see something big, they tend to exaggerate their size, especially when you're looking in it from the water, where getting an exact size estimate is always going to be a hard ask. And of course, the Trinity Alps salamanders could also have been a hoax. After all, if there were giant salamanders, there should have been some kind of sign of them being there, right? Obviously, they'd be a well-documented species, and I feel that'd also be a big draw to the park, which is why them being made up also makes sense. Come to our awesome park. There's giant salamanders. What better of a catch do you need than that? Look, in the end of the day, I feel like the Trinity Alps salamanders were hellbenders that were dumped as pets and whose size was greatly exaggerated. It feels like the rumors of them dragged out too long for them to just be a hoax with no basis. Hellbenders fit the description of the Trinity Alps salamanders pretty well, minus the 5 to 9 foot long cases, and match the Sacramento River one to a T. I feel the encounters just got exaggerated along the way, and somewhere along the line, they either migrated out of Trinity Alps or were eaten by a bear or something, or they may still be in bodies of water that cover the Trinity Alps wilderness. Actually, looking into it, bears don't like eating salamanders. So, that's a big hole in my theory. But skunks do eat salamanders, so maybe there's a super skunk or something. They eat salamanders. I mean, like, hey, it's just one massive cryptid skunk or a bear who just sucks it up and eats the salamanders, and we got a complete picture here. Jokes aside, though, the Trinity Alps giant salamander is an interesting cryptid, as even though it's just a giant salamander, even if true, it's plausible enough to have had several institutions fund expeditions to look for it, with people to this very day believing that it could still be there. And if the exaggerated claims are not exaggerations, dude, That's the biggest salamander ever. Just a big salamander doesn't cut it. The Komodo dragon's a big lizard.